Before the giants ruled America's highways, before Cummins and Caterpillar became household names, there was Buda, an engine maker that powered taxicabs through Chicago's streets, trucks across farmland, machines through factories. By the late 1920s, every trace of this company had simply vanished. No merger, no acquisition, just gone. How does an American engine manufacturer disappear so completely that even its name barely whispers through history? Here's what we know. Buda Engine Company existed. That much is certain. In the early 1900s, they built four-cylinder heavy-duty engines, the kind designed for punishment, built for machines that worked 18-hour days and couldn't afford to quit. Industrial engines. Workhorse power plants for a young, hungry America desperate to mechanize everything from factories to farms. But beyond that, the records thin out fast. No grand corporate histories survive. No published memoirs from founders. No archived financial statements detailing their rise. What remains are fragments. Mentions in old taxi company profiles, scattered references in industrial catalogs, and the quiet understanding that Buda once mattered enough to be remembered at all. The early 1900s were brutal for American manufacturers. You either scaled fast or you died slow. Competition was vicious, capital was scarce, and for every Cummins that survived to become legendary, a dozen names like Buda faded into nothing. Yet Buda didn't just fade, it vanished. Think about that for a second. This wasn't some garage operation building a handful of engines before going under. Buda supplied power plants for commercial operations, taxicabs navigating city streets, trucks hauling freight, equipment grinding through factory floors. These weren't hobbyist machines. They were working vehicles that needed reliable engines day after day, in an era when breakdowns meant bankruptcy. The truth is, Buda's fate wasn't sealed by bad engineering or unreliable products. Their engines worked. The four-cylinder design was solid, conventional, built to handle the kind of abuse early 20th century commercial vehicles demanded. No, what killed Buda had almost nothing to do with the machines themselves. It had everything to do with one high-stakes gamble, one partnership that should have been their crowning achievement, one venture that tied Buda's fortunes to a single company, a single market, a single city. And when that venture collapsed, when strikes, debt, and regulatory chaos tore it apart, Buda went down with it. The story of America's vanished engine empire doesn't start in a factory. It starts in Chicago, in taxicabs, with a company called Bauer that made one hell of a bet and lost everything. 1924, Chicago. A group of new financiers saw an opportunity. The city's taxi industry was exploding. More riders every month, more demand for cabs, more money to be made if you could just get enough vehicles on the street fast enough. So they bought themselves a manufacturing facility in Harvey, Illinois, just south of Chicago proper. The goal? Produce heavy-duty taxicabs at scale and flood the market before anyone else could catch up. They called it the Bauer Taxicab Manufacturing Company. And they needed engines. Lots of them. That's where Buda came in. Bauer didn't mess around with off-the-shelf parts. These weren't cheap city runabouts designed to last a year and fall apart. The cabs rolling out of Harvey were built for punishment. 115-inch wheelbase chassis, Westinghouse air brakes for stopping power that could handle Chicago's stop-and-go brutality, electrically activated emergency brakes for backup. Heavy-duty rigs designed to run all day, every day, in one of America's toughest urban environments. And at the heart of every single one, a Buda four-cylinder engine. This was the partnership that would define Buda's trajectory. Maybe not their only customer. We simply don't have records confirming others, but certainly their most visible, most ambitious, most concentrated bet. Bauer's success meant steady orders, steady cash flow, steady legitimacy for Buda as a serious industrial engine supplier. Bauer's failure, well, we'll get to that. For a brief moment in the mid-20s, it looked like it might actually work. Harvey's facility hummed with production. Cabs rolled off the line, Buda engines powered them into Chicago's streets. The financiers had capital, the engineers had capability, the market had demand. Everything was in place. But Chicago wasn't some neutral playing field where the best product wins. It was a city controlled by political machines, dominated by union power, and increasingly regulated by laws designed to favor the big players over scrappy newcomers. Bauer Taxicab was about to learn that lesson the hard way. And Buda? Buda was along for the ride, whether they understood the stakes or not. The stage was set for success, with Buda's engines powering the way. But the very city of Chicago and unforeseen labor disputes would soon turn this promise into a nightmare. Because in 1926, everything started falling apart, and it started with 500 angry cabbies walking off the job. It lasted a full month. 500 union cabbies, drivers who'd been hired to operate Bauer's heavy-duty taxicabs, walked out. No warning, no negotiation. Just a coordinated shutdown that brought Bauer Taxicab Manufacturing Company to its knees. For 30 straight days, the cab sat idle. The Westinghouse brakes didn't matter. The Buda engines didn't matter. The 115-inch wheelbase and electrically activated emergency systems didn't matter. None of it mattered when there was nobody behind the wheel. The strike paralyzed everything. Revenue stopped. Operating costs kept bleeding. And while Bauer scrambled to figure out how to restart operations, the damage was already done. Drivers had leverage. They knew it. Management knew it. And the entire city watched as Bauer's ambitious expansion ground to a halt. For Buda, this was devastating. Think about it from their perspective. They'd committed production capacity to supplying Bauer's engines. They'd built their supply chain around steady orders from Harvey. And now, through no fault of their own, not because the engines failed, not because the design was flawed, their entire market was frozen by a labor dispute they had zero control over. This is what happens when you tie your fate to one customer, one bet, one city. The strike exposed something crucial. Bauer wasn't just competing against other taxi companies. It was fighting Chicago itself. The unions, the political machines, the entrenched interests that didn't appreciate newcomers trying to carve out territory. And Bauer, for all its ambition and investment, simply didn't have the resources or connections to fight back. When the cabbies finally returned to work, the damage was already catastrophic. A month of lost revenue is bad. A month of lost momentum is worse. Competitors had filled the gap. Riders had found other options. And the financiers backing Bauer? They were starting to sweat. But the strike was just the first crack. The real collapse, the thing that would ultimately bury both Bauer and Buda, was already building beneath the surface. Because Bauer wasn't just struggling with labor disputes. It was drowning in debt, bleeding cash from operations that never hit projections, and facing a regulatory environment specifically designed to crush companies like them. The strike was a devastating blow to Bauer's operations. But financial mismanagement and a rapidly changing regulatory landscape would soon deliver even more crippling setbacks. And unlike a strike, which eventually ends, this next wave of problems had no resolution in sight. The numbers were brutal. Sales were far below expectations, not close, not disappointing, catastrophically low. The taxicabs that were supposed to flood Chicago's streets and generate steady cash flow, they weren't moving. Bauer couldn't sell them fast enough, couldn't lease them fast enough, couldn't even give them away fast enough to cover the mounting costs of production and operation. And it got worse. Gas and oil accounts, the basic fuel costs to run the cab fleet, were months in arrears. Creditors started filing receivership motions. The suppliers who'd extended credit expecting steady payments now realized Bauer couldn't pay them back. The financiers who'd bought the Harvey facility with such confidence were watching their investment evaporate in real time. The problem wasn't just low sales. It was systemic, eating Bauer alive from the inside. Here's what they didn't anticipate: Chicago's medallion laws. In the 1920s, under Mayor William Hale Thompson's administration, the city implemented regulations that fundamentally reshaped the taxi industry. The goal was control, limiting the number of cabs on the street, regulating who could operate, creating a licensing system that favored established players. On paper, it made sense. Too many unregulated cabs created chaos. In practice, it crushed small operators. Bauer was trying to break into a market that had just erected legal barriers specifically designed to prevent exactly what they were doing. The big fleets, the established companies with deep pockets and political connections, could afford the medallions, navigate the regulations, absorb the compliance costs. Bauer couldn't. So even if they'd somehow resolved the strike, even if sales had picked up, they were still fighting a rigged game. The regulatory environment wasn't neutral, it was hostile, and Bauer, already bleeding from the strike and drowning in operational debt, simply didn't have the resources to adapt. For Buda, this meant the end. Their primary market, maybe their only significant market, was collapsing. Orders stopped coming, production slowed, and unlike Bauer, which at least had assets to liquidate, Buda was just an engine supplier tied to a sinking ship, no diversified customer base. No fallback market, just a slow, inevitable descent as their biggest partner imploded. The writing was on the wall by late 1926. Creditors were circling, assets were being eyed for seizure, and in the background, barely mentioned in the historical record, Buda's engine operation was quietly suffocating. As Bauer spiraled into deeper debt, the writing was on the wall. But the final, definitive hammer blow was yet to fall, bringing down both the cab company and its engine supplier in one swift, merciless strike. Late 1926, Bauer Taxicab Manufacturing Company filed for bankruptcy. It wasn't sudden, everyone saw it coming, but when the paperwork finally went through, when the courts officially acknowledged what had been obvious for months, the implications were immediate and absolute. Bauer was done. No restructuring, no white knight investor, no last-minute turnaround. Just liquidation. By January 1927, the assets were being auctioned off. The Harvey manufacturing facility, the one those ambitious financiers had purchased with such confidence just 3 years earlier, was seized by the bank holding the mortgage. The taxi operations, what little remained, were sold to Michael Shapiro for a fraction of their initial investment. Everything was dismantled, parceled out, erased. And Buda? Buda's assets were liquidated right alongside them. Here's what we know for certain. By early 1927, Buda Engine Company ceased to exist as an operational entity. No records indicate they found new customers. No evidence suggests they pivoted to other markets. No corporate successor carried the name forward. They simply stopped. The engines they'd built for Bauer sold as scrap or spare parts if they were sold at all. The manufacturing capacity they'd committed? Gone. The workforce they'd employed? Scattered. The brand that once powered commercial vehicles through American streets and factories? Forgotten. By January 1927, the auctioneer's gavel fell, silencing not just Bauer, but the Buda engine empire along with it. This is how companies vanish. Not through dramatic fires or spectacular failures. Not through hostile takeovers or public scandals. They vanish through bankruptcy proceedings, asset liquidations, and the quiet erasure of paperwork that nobody bothers to preserve. Buda's story ends not with a climax, but with a whimper. A footnote in someone else's corporate collapse, a casualty of decisions they didn't make and forces they couldn't control. And here's the brutal irony. Their engines probably worked fine. Nothing in the historical record suggests Buda's four-cylinder power plants were unreliable or poorly designed. The problem wasn't engineering. It was economics. It was timing. It was the catastrophic decision, intentional or not, to tie their entire operation to one customer in one market, in one city, at exactly the wrong moment in American industrial history. So, was Buda truly an empire? That's debatable. The evidence suggests something smaller, more fragile. A regional manufacturer with ambitions that outpaced their diversification. But empire or not, their disappearance still represents something significant. The erasure of an American engine maker that once powered real machines, employed real workers, and built real products. With Bauer dismantled and Buda's engine market erased, the empire was gone. Therefore, its legacy now exists only as a cautionary tale of a bygone era, leaving us to wonder about other forgotten giants. And that's exactly where we need to go next, into the lessons this vanishing teaches us about the brutal realities of American industry. Let's be honest about what Buda was. Not Cummins, not Caterpillar, not a titan that defined an era or built engines still running today in collectors' garages. The historical record is too thin for that claim. What we know for certain is limited. They built four-cylinder engines, they supplied Bauer Taxicab, and they disappeared when Bauer collapsed in 1927. But here's what makes their story worth telling. Buda represents something deeper than just one company's failure. They're a reminder that the early 20th century was absolutely ruthless for American manufacturers. You could build a solid product, secure a major customer, and still get erased overnight by forces completely outside your control. Strikes, debt, regulations designed to favor incumbents. One bad bet could end you. And Buda made that bet with Bauer. Think about the compounding failures, the month-long strike that paralyzed operations, the sales that never materialized, the gas and oil accounts bleeding red for months, the Chicago medallion laws that structurally disadvantaged small operators. Any one of those might have been survivable. All of them together? Fatal. Bauer couldn't withstand the cascade, and Buda, tied to Bauer's fate, went down with them. So what's the lesson here? Diversification matters. It always has. Tying your entire operation to one customer, one market, one city is rolling the dice with your company's survival. Buda learned that the hard way. Cummins, by contrast, survived the same brutal era by spreading risk across multiple industries: marine, trucking, industrial, agricultural. When one market collapsed, others kept them alive. Buda didn't have that luxury. Or maybe they never built it. The records don't tell us. But there's another lesson too, one that's easy to miss. Regulatory capture is real, and it kills. Chicago's medallion laws weren't some neutral safety regulation. They were designed to protect established taxi companies from upstart competitors like Bauer. The big fleets had the political connections, the capital, the infrastructure to navigate the new system. Bauer didn't. And when those regulations combined with labor strikes and poor sales, the result wasn't just Bauer's bankruptcy. It was the complete erasure of their engine supplier. That's how fragile these partnerships were. That's how quickly an entire company could vanish. And here's the haunting part. We don't even know if Buda tried to pivot. Maybe they sought new customers and failed. Maybe they ran out of capital before they could diversify. Maybe the liquidation happened so fast they never had a chance. The historical record just stops. No final chapter, no postscript, just silence. The story of Buda isn't just about engines. It's about the relentless, unforgiving march of progress itself. It's about how innovation and ambition mean nothing without capital, diversification, and sheer luck. It's about how quickly the American dream of building something that lasts can turn into an auctioneer's gavel and a forgotten name. So the next time you see a Cummins badge or hear a Caterpillar engine rumble to life, remember, for every giant that survived, a dozen names like Buda simply vanished. Not because they built bad products, not because they lacked ambition, but because in the brutal, chaotic early days of American industry, survival required more than good engineering. It required everything to go right. And for Buda, everything went wrong. If you know of other forgotten American engine makers, drop their names in the comments. These stories matter. They're the ghosts of an industrial era that built the foundation for everything we drive, farm, and build today. And if you want more deep dives into the machines and companies that shaped America, the legends and the lost, subscribe to Vanished Products. Because this vanishing is just one story. There are dozens more buried in the rubble of history waiting to be told.